Welcome back. I wonder if I might explain a pattern to you, and that is the structure of the day. And then that will help us to just have a quick framework for how we understand the questions that we're tackling to be related together. Sometimes people ask questions and they are more related to classical truth. They are questions like, tell me God exists, help me see that God exists. Persuade me that the New Testament is an accurate record of what Jesus said and did. Convince me about the evidence that God is absolutely real. And they're questions of a kind of more evidential nature, they're questions of more scientific nature, they're questions about the fundamental truth of things. Then you might have noticed that there are other types of questions that are coming up. Questions like this. How is it relevant? Okay, we can talk about the truth questions later, but even before I get into those truth questions, show me how it actually makes an impact in your life. Those now are actually likely to be more of the questions we hear than questions of, how many classical truth seekers like me at university who are saying, I want to know the truth about what philosophical outlook is the true view of reality. There are very few people who are in that sort of weird category. I realize I'm a bit odd. But more people are saying, I need something that works, something that's relevant, something that connects with my life. Show me, because it seems like religion doesn't connect, but you seem to think that your faith does connect. Show me how. So there are some people who are not so much directly saying, persuade me that it's true, but they're saying, I want to know how it connects. That's what this is about, this session. And then the third type of question people might ask is it really good for us? Is it healthy? Does it harm us? Is it actually good for society, for the world, for women, for people who are LGBTQI+? What's it like for everyone? So we're going to now talk about, is God still relevant to 21st century people? If somebody asked you the question, I'd like to know how your faith is relevant, what might they be thinking? What might they be asking you? What might be behind that question? Can I invite you to be friendly to your neighbors again? And to move a bit closer or to chat in twos or threes? And just to ask, what might be behind somebody saying, I'd like to know how your faith is relevant? What might they be really asking you? What's the question behind the question? I hope you've had a chance to share a little bit. We will have a bit more conversation in a moment, but I want to give you a bit of a framework for this question, how I think about it, and I think you might find it helpful. So, one way that I approach it is, what would religion or God need to do or to be in order to be relevant today? And quite a straightforward, quite easy, I think quite a kind of lazy answer would be, yes, of course, religion shapes people in all sorts of ways. Of course it's relevant in the 21st century because it explains part of the way people are. Okay, the question then is simplistically true. Yes, of course religion is relevant in the 21st century because it's part of what shapes people in a modern society. But there's another sense that we can ask the question, is it relevant? And it's in that sense of, how does it connect with my life? How does it actually connect with the things and the challenges and the problems that I'm facing today? And I'm going to focus on that. And what I want to do is I want to take the questions that I think that human beings are fundamentally asking in the 21st century. And I want to take those questions and I want to go to the absolute center of Christian faith, to the cross and the resurrection of Christ. And I want to ask, how does the cross and the resurrection speak, that central moment in Christianity, how does that speak to the questions that are actually really present in our lives now today? So I want to start with the cross, because I think it's the center of Christian faith. And I include within, when I say the cross, I also include within that the life and the resurrection of Jesus. You see, for John Stott, what dominated Christ's mind was not the living, but the giving of his life. The cross is the central moment in the life of the central figure of Christianity. And if you want to go to the center of something, if you want to find out if something is relevant, you need to go to its center point and say, it's what its core, fundamental teaching, does that work? Does that connect? Does that actually help? Okay, so what are some of the challenges and questions that we face today? What do they mean? You could look out of the window here. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being on an airplane or maybe being on the wheel next to the Houses of Parliament, going round in the bubbles, or even maybe looking down from a high building, a hotel or somewhere, an office block, and you look down and you go, look at all that life down there. And then the thought can come, all that's going on, and do those people know God? Are they even aware of God? It's almost as if life can go on very easily without people having any idea of God sometimes. Now, some of them obviously know God, and maybe there's some way from above to spot believers. Hands up, pray, who knows? But it seems like much of what happens in life is unaffected, distant, far away from what happened in a distant land 2,000 years ago on a bloody Roman cross. It seems very far away from what goes on in a modern city, what goes on in a modern home. How actually might the cross be relevant? We could point to social, climate, economic issues, political instabilities, pandemics, conflicts, violence. We could look at all of those issues, and I think we could say, well, how does the cross speak to all that? But I'm going to approach things in a slightly different way. I want to start with questions. Everyday, normal questions that real people like you and me ask. So I asked ChatGPT. I don't know if you've heard of ChatGPT. It's an online AI chat system. It's a sort of language model. And ChatGPT told me, I asked it, what are now the searching personal questions that people now are asking you to answer for it? And these are the top 20 questions that it's asking. I'll just read the first 5. Number 1, what's the meaning of life? Number 2, how can I find happiness and fulfillment? What's my purpose in life? How can I overcome my fears and anxieties? How can I deal with loneliness and isolation? Confidence, forgiveness, grief, relationships, positive impact on the world, finding peace, finding spirituality, coping with stress, dealing with addiction, trying to live authentically and find true selfhood, balancing personal and professional life, achieving goals, handling failure, cultivating a positive mindset. I mean, these are some of the questions that people are struggling with, that we're asking. We're asking as well as people out there. And I think we see partly reflected in this the modern search for the self, the journey to find the self, which is now not so much a journey to go out there to find someone who will tell me who I am, but instead it's an internal journey to find who I am through looking inwards. We might call this therapeutic individualism, using the language of therapy and harm sometimes to articulate a healthy view of the world. We live in the great age now of people asking identity questions, but with reference to themselves. How will I find the true self that I really am? Charles Taylor talks about how in the modern age, because we now don't trust institutions and frameworks and religions, people now say, no, these frameworks, like was coming up in a question earlier, churches have done these things and we want to throw those things away. We don't want to hear those things anymore. People are now saying, I don't want a big answer. I don't want a big framework. I don't want a big religious system. I don't even want a big political system. Instead, I'm going to look to myself and I'm going to find myself and find out who I am. So there's a whole throwing away now of big frameworks and of a kind of an axis or a grid in which you can navigate or use to navigate. We're throwing the maps away. We're throwing the stories away. We're throwing the institutions away. We're throwing the big answers away. Instead, we're looking more to ourselves to be the sources of what's right and wrong, what our true identity is. That's the age we're now in. But the problem is it's actually, if I gave you a white blank piece of paper and I put a mark on it and I said, could you over the phone where this mark is on the piece of paper, it would be very difficult to do it without knowing where the sides are or without being able to measure it. It's very hard to work out where you are, what direction you should go in, what your duties are, what your responsibilities are, if you don't have an axis or some way of measuring where the points are, how you can get from this point to that point. You know how we all did algebra in school? You do the point in the brackets, the first number is like the way you go, is it up and then along, or is it along and up? You remember how it is. Where's the maths teacher? Where are you? She's still here? There you are. Are we up first or are we along first? Along the corridor, up the stairs. That gives us a point, doesn't it? Thank you. Can't remember my maths from school. So that gives us a reference point, that system. We don't have that anymore, so we look to the self. A philosopher called Immanuel Kant framed 3 questions at the start of his book, The Critique of Pure Reason. His 3 questions were, what may I hope for? What should I do? What can I know? What may I hope for is both now and in the present, but also in the future, where are we going? It's the question, is everything going to be okay? It's the question, what will happen if Russia invades more of Europe? It's the question, what will happen after the aftermath of the political elections that we're going to see? It's the question, what will happen as China rises in different ways, and what will happen over Taiwan? It's these questions of the future. What can we hope for as human beings? But it's even more than that. It's the question of what can we hope for in life and beyond life. The second question, what should I do, is touching on the ethical, the moral sphere. It's saying, what do we do with what we see in the world? How should we respond to it? What is our response to evil? What is our response to the dark nature of human beings sometimes? And then the third is the question, what can I know? How can I see things clearly? How can I see reality? I would like to be able to see reality clearly just for one day. Particularly the day before the lottery would be wonderful. But this is the realm of how we can really know the way things are. You've all heard jokes about politicians and not telling the truth. We'd like to be able to see the way things really are, not to be spun all the time, but actually to see things as they really are. I'm going to use Kant's questions because I think that even though they were written down about 200, 300 years ago, I think they're still really good questions because they still refer to these really important areas that we struggle with. Well, how can we find hope? What should we do? How should we respond to the world? What are our duties? And how can we know things? And who even are we as well? So, first one, what can I hope for? Imagining or conceiving of a better future requires the use of imagination. And what I think we're looking for is a clear-eyed, non-naive way of having hope in life. Now, our hope can be put in getting certain achievements, but it also could be about love. We might want real friendship in the future. We might want real intimacy. We might want somebody who knows us. We might want to buy things and get things. A friend told me a little while ago that she used to date somebody who used to buy yachts, cars, and things to make himself feel more alive. I quite often find that I can project a sort of sense of hope on a new gadget or a new toy or a new thing. Sometimes we just feel a bit stuck in our circumstances, and our hope is more related to being released from those circumstances. An illness, a sadness. I talked to a friend of mine, and he said he traveled quite a lot, and he said to me, when I travel, I like to ask people a question. And I said, well, what's the question? He said, I like to ask people, do you hope that your children, your siblings, your kids, your cousins, do you hope that they will stay here where you are in this country, or do you hope that they will leave? And you can find out, quite clearly what somebody thinks of their hope for their own country, their own situation, as to their answer to that question. It can indicate they don't have a lot of hope, or they do have a lot of hope for their country. And actually, remaining hopeful in modern life can be quite hard fought. It can be quite a battle, particularly given our struggles with mental health, can make it even tougher. And before we even went into things like global pandemics, levels of anxiety were already peaking at high levels. And actually, finding hope in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe, at this point in history, it can be a hard fight. Employers are now increasingly, and educators are increasingly looking to resilience training, to mental health first aid training, in order to support people and help people who are trying to live, sometimes without hope. A factor in this could be communications technologies, the internet, which can mean we're more connected to global threats and sadnesses and bad news than ever before. a school head teacher in London told me a year or two ago. She said that she has to, when there's a shooting in the United States, any shooting at any school, any high school in the United States, she has to bring in pastoral support staff. She has to ring them up late at night and say, I need you tomorrow. She has to bring them into the school in order to support the students in her school in London who their only connection is over the internet because they're so affected by what they watch because of the killing spree or the murder or the hurt that's being caused in this place in America and another school. And so, we're in this cycle through the media as well, through phones, of economic crashes, moral scandals, terrorism, extremism, wars, instability, panics, concerns about the future. Every single generation is now touched by the struggles of living life and staying hopeful and hoping that things will improve. I think Immanuel Kant was absolutely right that this question lies right at the heart of the human soul and heart. I think this is a modern struggle, and I think it was a struggle that he recognized at his time. Peter Kreeft, a Catholic philosopher, said this. He said, the deepest hope of the human heart is heaven. I wonder if this is because heaven is our deepest hope because it's the only world that we tend to imagine that doesn't include death. Death is the big hope crusher. It's the big hope crusher. A good consensus of psychologists and sociologists like Ernest Becker have identified death, even if we don't talk about it, as one of the greatest fears of 21st century human beings. With all of our medical care and with all of our sophistication, we cannot stop it, and we fear it. And so maybe if hope and what we hope for is held alongside what we fear, and if what we fear is stronger, ultimately perhaps death sometimes, or hopelessness, or no way out, or no way forwards, then it's actually very hard to live in hope if you don't feel very hopeful. But Ernest Becker says this: the irony of man's condition is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation, but it is life itself which awakens it, and so we must shrink back from being fully alive. Now, some turn at this point to transhumanism, to this amalgamation of atheism with technology, where we use technology to rescue ourselves from aging, from biological limitations. We might try to transfer ourselves into robot bodies or into computer systems, or scan ourselves and replicate ourselves in computer systems. That's the hope of transhumanists, is that we'll be able to overcome the biological limitations of our existence. What, I wonder, do we make of this? In the book of Colossians, the answer comes in very clearly. God made you alive with Christ. He forgave us all our sins, having cancelled the written code with its regulations that was against us and stood opposed to us. He took it away, nailing it to the cross, and having disarmed the powers and the authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. And I take that triumph to not just be earthly authorities, but it to be actually the threat and the spectre and the fear of death. So how is the cross relevant to the question, what can I hope for? Christ confronts the fear and the reality of death with his cross. The shame and the pain of humanity is transformed through Jesus' death on that cross into the hope of a new friendship with God. People can now move, you and I can now move from searching for hope, alienated from God, wondering whether or not God is even hearing us, to a resurrection-equipped people, to a people equipped with a new promise of a new status, who have an answer that speaks from Christ's cross to the deepest fear that we have. When Christ comes back from the dead, if that event is true, if that resurrection event is correct and accurate, if that really happened, as sure as the seat you're sitting on, if that happened, then it is the most hopeful news you have ever heard in your life. It's a personal, ongoing, life-giving, death-silencing, shame-busting friendship with God. That's what you're sitting on. There's a new world breaking in the cross. That's God's declaration in the cross. This world, God's world that's breaking in, does not include a future of suffering and death. I find that pretty relevant when I'm searching for hope. I find that helpful. I think there's contact between the question, what may I hope for, and the cross of Jesus Christ. Second question, what should I do? Kant's second question concerns the moral sphere. What does this mean? It's the area of right and wrong, as we've been discussing already this morning. Human beings and the evils that they do to each other have been some of the greatest sources of suffering and destruction in human history. Futurists now speculate, I don't even really know what a futurist is, I think it's somebody who talks about the future confidently. They speculate that one of the greatest challenges to the survival of human beings in the future is, what will we do with the new, when they're not saying it's AI is going to kill us, they say one of the greatest challenges we will have is what we are going to do with the technological powers we evolve for ourselves or we create for ourselves in the future. And that's absolutely true for the last 100 years, isn't it? How will we avoid using those new tools and those new skills and those new technological abilities to decrease rather than increase human suffering? Every few days, the news reports to us new news of an urban shooting. Somebody got hold of a weapon who shouldn't have had one, or somebody was hell-bent on killing a lot of people and hurting a lot of people. Our security services are actually hard-pressed to keep a lid on the radicals and the extremists who threaten to try and rampage through the streets of our cities with machetes and guns, causing as much horror and turmoil and hurt as they possibly can. Ken McCallum, who I think is the previous director of MI5, said in 2021, when he was the director, that in the last sort of 4 years or so, 31 late-stage terror plots had been foiled in the UK. The Office of National Statistics recorded in 2020 to 2021, recorded in that year 600 murders. 1,574,000 violent incidents, millions of thefts. Human moral conduct impacts everything, from wearing a mask on a train to how we conduct our financial markets. It has witnessed and led to financial crises and crashes like those that engulfed WorldCom, Enron, car emission scandals, political downfalls. And at home, when you're sitting at home now, it's not uncommon for you to get phone calls from people using their own voices to try to persuade you that they are representatives of your phone company or IT company, to try to get you to give them your credit card numbers or your bank numbers, to try to get you to... They're trying to steal money right in front of your nose, scamming you to try to do that. We've all had those phone calls. I've said to them a couple of times, I'll tell you everything you want to know, including my bank information, if you honestly answer one question. And one of them took me up on it, and I said, okay, why are you doing this? He said, can I call you back? He called me 5 minutes later. He said, I'm now outside the building on my mobile phone. I don't know why I'm doing this. Thank you for asking me that question. I said, I want to pray for you, that God might find a way out for you. You need to stop doing this. But we are living in a world where there is so much brokenness. This is why Dallas Willard says the greatest need that you and I have, the greatest need for humanity in general, is the renovation. We will have these shows, don't we? Renovation of houses. Somebody goes into somebody's house and they're like, oh, you could have a different shade of weird paint on your wall, and look at this sofa you can have. What we need is not home renovation, we need heart renovation. That's what all humanity needs. And I see examples of moral failure in my own life too. Paul, the Apostle Paul, finds it in his own heart. Think of these words from Romans chapter 7. I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I don't want to do, I agree that the Lord's good, and as it is no longer I myself who do it, but is something sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I mean, isn't this our struggle? Isn't this actually the struggle? It's not just out there on the news when we look at politicians and we look at warmongering, tyrannical despots in different countries. It's actually the struggle of our own hearts as we know what we ought to do and we don't do it. I struggle, you struggle, perhaps. What should we do? How does the cross speak to this need of human beings in the 21st century to be transformed? How is the gospel, how is the cross relevant to life now in this respect? Well, Jesus invites people to receive forgiveness for their honest humility. He forgives people over and over again. When he meets people and talks to them, they are offered a reconnected relationship with God. There are two sides to this. Christ's cross is an indictment. Christ's cross is a clear statement, the biggest statement that's ever been made about my sin. That it is so serious and so problematic that it requires God's judgment, that we're in real trouble. But it also tells us that not only are we in real trouble because of our sin, the cross also shows us that God has gone to real trouble for us. The cross is a profound diagnosis and judgment of human nature and our state of alienation from God. But the cross is also a profound treatment of that problem, because it is no less than the divine offer of a slowly, morally transformative and restorative friendship with God. The cross of Christ speaks to the 21st century struggle to renovate the heart and actualize right living, because it calls out our own personal battles with our own tendencies and asks us to step into the light of God's love and his mercy with those things. The cross delivers a relevant series of home truths that Christ wants to communicate with us. We have a problem, but he's done what is necessary to deal with it. And the answer is that new, living, loving friendship with God. Now, although many, many people understand the Christian faith to be essentially about moral improvement, being a good Christian kind of type of language. I'm a good Christian, I'm getting better and better and better and better. Christian faith is the precise opposite from a program of moral improvement. Christian faith is actually about admitting that I am down here and without help I cannot go anywhere. It's not about saying I'm doing better and better and better because I'm church going, because I'm in a relationship with God. It is instead humility. Christ's cross teaches us that he can change us and forgive us and walk with us. He offers us that moral transformation through friendship with God. I'm going to move to the last question now. What can I know? Kant's third question concerns our grasp of reality, the search to know or to understand. I mean, universities and education systems are based on this fundamental question. How can we find out what it is worth knowing and teach it to the young? Every book on every shelf purports to offer us knowledge that will inform our understanding of the world in helpful and useful ways, even if it's in the form of a story. Our understanding and our thirst for knowledge as human beings has taken us to the stars already, and it'll probably take us to Mars within many of our lifetimes. The need to know and to learn more has taken us down to the bottom of the deepest parts of the ocean, the Marinara Trench, 6.8 miles down into the ocean. And now, right now, we've poured $4.7 billion into a massive particle collider under the Swiss and French mountains to try to answer questions about physics, about dark matter and the Higgs boson, to try to understand more about the universe that we live in. Human beings are absolutely unique in asking these kinds of questions. Why? How? How does it work? How can we understand it? We puzzle and ponder and wonder about the big questions and about the meaning of life and about what the world is. Scientists, explorers, artists, poets, authors, and philosophers write books describing the current state of our knowledge. and try to answer questions. Who are we? Where have we come from? What is the universe all about? Who and what is behind everything? What will happen in the future? These are the questions of the hour, they are the questions of today, and they will be the questions of tomorrow. The search for knowing, the search for clarity, the search for seeing. In one of the letters between the early churches, John writes this about what we can know from the cross and from Jesus. God showed how much he loved us by sending his one and only Son into the world so that we might have eternal life through him. This is real love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as a sacrifice to take away our sins. How is the cross relevant to this? We might ask questions and we might wonder about what we do in the world. We live in a world that needs clarity about what hope is, what goodness is, what truth is, what right and wrong are. The cross confronts our deepest fears around shame and death, and through God and through the way he reveals himself in the cross, it opens a way for us to experience a transforming relationship with him through forgiveness, holy friendship, and forgiveness. But the cross actually speaks to our desire to know in a deeper way. The cross declares our value to God himself. It tells you and me that you're wanted, that I'm loved, that I'm known, that God is real, that a loving God is working through the pain and the suffering and the hardship of this world, that wrongs are seen, and that there is true justice and mercy. Let me conclude with this. Through the cross, Jesus speaks to our questions, to our worst fears, deals with our worst parts. He tells us the truth about reality, and he promises to show us gently how we can live in freedom. He tells us that he loves us, that he's with us, that we're not alone. And some of the most difficult questions that humanity is asking right now are intercepted by Christ's cross. And if religion means the cross, and what I have described is correct in terms of these being our questions and how the cross meets them, this isn't just relevant. This is an absolute revolution that we need to throw open the doors and the windows of the churches and proclaim to the world. Okay. I'd like you to get into ones and twos, and I'd like you to try to just answer the question together. What impact does God have in your own life? What impact does God have in your own life? I've got a little extra challenge for you. If any of you are kind of into social media, don't know if you are or not, but film a little reel later with the impact that you'll find or that you describe, and I dare you to post that online. That would be quite fun. Tag the church. That'd be quite good. But what impact does God have in your own life? And in a way, you're preparing for somebody asking the question, how is God relevant? Because they need to hear what impact Jesus has in your daily life. So, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to talk about that. Just take a little moment to discuss that question, then Charlie's going to come and help me with some questions. Would you like to ask a question or share something in the realm of this whole question of is God still relevant in the 21st century? Are there ways that you have enjoyed having these sorts of conversations? Were there things that you found helpful here or that you like talking to people about? Love to hear from you. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. Please.
I found it interesting you said that death was one of the biggest fears.
Yes.
And there's a quote which I've never forgotten. We heard Simon Gilbert speak. He was on one of the most dangerous roads in the world, out in Berlin. And he's going on this road where, gangs and attacks all the time with a fellow missionary, who turned to him and said, "Isn't it wonderful, Simon, that we are immortal until the Lord calls us home?" And I just thought that was so fantastic. from that, but that's just stayed with me. That's the difference that God makes.
I don't think we talk about how the fear of death impacts us very much, but psychologists and sociologists are convinced that it's part of what causes the anxiety to live in certain ways, to achieve certain things, to be perceived in certain ways.
Something at the same time when you said that about fear of death, it's this enormous conundrum that Parliament was speaking about euthanasia. And there's an awful lot of sentimentalisation that comes within that conversation. It's a bit like the whole loved one business in the COVID thing, which began to grate after a while, for me anyway. So we've got euthanasia on the one side and talking about that, and then on the other side, we've got abortion being a matter of choice and probably the biggest cause of death of humanity, but of course it's not a human, is it? Anyway, I say that sarcastically, but it's the biggest cause of death in the world. So we have this weird relationship with death. It's okay when it's a choice, and it's convenient, but it's a fear that we have. I mean, I know that's a little bit muddled, but I think it is muddled. Does that mean?
I think it's also that we don't want to see it. We don't want it to be a painful, complicated, we only really want to be connected or involved in the deaths we absolutely have to be. So actually the idea of people going off there or go off to Switzerland or wherever it is actually is fine because it's out of sight, out of mind. And we very much have this blinkered thing. We put inconvenient people in special places where they're well looked after because we're not heartless. But actually, one of the things I found as a pastor, I'm sure some of the other people here, and maybe you can relate to this, the opportunity and privilege of being with somebody when they die is astonishing. And it's messy, and there is a level of, not exactly humiliation, but kind of, it is a bit embarrassing. It's all bodily functions and that sort of thing. But it is also, it's an amazing gift. And there's amazing things that happen, most of which you never choose to go through, but you can look back at and actually see that we're all going to die unless Jesus comes back really soon. But we can prepare for that. We can go through it. Like God meets us in it. And I think we very much say any sort of pain or suffering, we want it to go away, be put aside, away from us. I want to just carry on with my life. And I think that fits exactly what you just said.
Yeah, sorry, just as a follow-up from what Jane said, I think that actually what we fear is loss of control. And death is the biggest loss of control, which is why people think it's okay when it's euthanasia or abortion, because people are choosing that. But it's other death where we don't have any control, and that's really what we're frightened of, more than the actual act of passing, if that makes sense. And I also think being with somebody when they pass is a beautiful privilege. So I don't think we should be afraid to talk about that, because I think it's a real...
It's also horrid sometimes as well. I'm not trying to make sure it's...
It is horrid, but there is a privilege in being a part of that, and just having an acknowledgement of the fact that it is something that we all need to face. And if we were perhaps more open in talking about it, we'd be less afraid. But I think, like I say, it's the loss of control is what is really frightening. So.
We should not fear death. Nothing is more certain from the day we are born that we are going to leave this planet one day. The great hope is that we will not leave it in fear, suffering, and distress, as is happening to so many people today. Euthanasia is a step in the right direction. It is said people may abuse it. Of course they will. By the same factor, you could say, we mustn't put goods on display in the shop, someone might steal them. But we should look at death in the right way. It is leaving life. It happens to us all one day, and we should look at it sensibly. I think we are wrong in keeping so many people suffering and living on in agony with medications and all that's being done.
Thank you. Can I ask Tom to comment, or Charlie?
I can comment briefly on that. We do whole things about medical ethics and things, which I'd prefer to do it properly. I don't think we should just be extending life. I think one of the reasons why, like in COVID we saw it, the idea that the only measure was how many people were dying, as opposed to anything about quality of life. My wife was working at the time with people with dementia. She was running the community organisation supporting people with dementia and their carers. And it is hard. It is hard, and I think fear of death doesn't make it easier. I think actually there are many things already under the law that can be done to alleviate suffering and pain. And I would say that actually the particular thing that's proposed is actually removing the safeguards for a lot of vulnerable people. We already have suicide as the biggest killer of, certainly men under 45, and I think it might be women under 38 or something like that. It's already quite terrifying how many people think their lives aren't worth living. And I think we should be doing everything we can to reinforce the value of life at every single breath. And just to come back to the point about control, I think control is an illusion. We love the idea of being in control, and the fundamental thing about being a creature is we're not in control. That's what we read just earlier in Acts 17. It's in him we live and move and have our being. And it's actually up to the Lord to take us. And therefore, I don't think we should be prolonging life forever in some sort of fear of death. But I also think we'll be very careful about giving people the active power to end somebody's life.
Claire wanted to speak?
Yeah, I guess I would just add that when we come to ethical questions, ethical dilemmas, and applied ethical situations, one approach is to say, okay, the framework we're going to use are frameworks of harms or suffering, or frameworks of responsibility. But what we've got to do, I think, if we're thinking about it from the point of view of a biblical lens, is we've got to say, how do we derive ethics from Scripture? How do we go about doing that? Do we pluck out principles, or do we read Scripture and let Scripture read us? And let Scripture sort of set up our ethical framework. I'll try and give you an example from reproductive technologies. Within sort of biblical instructions on creating life and reproducing, you've got clear mandates in Genesis that there is a permission and an invitation from God for humanity to create life or to have children, to have families. So clearly there's a biblical permission to use, to procreate, to do that. But there isn't the permission within those same passages that we have the right to take away that life if it's inconvenient for us, for example. So we have to say, well, what are the principles that Scripture sets up that we can use technology within? And technology is always going to offer us options. And I think that where we've got to do the work is we have to bring biblical ethics into the picture, where we say, the principles I'm using to evaluate this application of technology to life extension or to euthanasia or to reproductive technologies, we've got to really do the work to make sure that the ethical lens and principles that we use to evaluate that situation have to be biblical. Now, how we make those arguments socially may come down to making the arguments from other factors. We may need to use statistical or psychological or other arguments. I've really found a particular Christian ethicist very, very helpful, very, very thought-provoking, two in particular that I'll recommend, who are doing this approach of saying, how do we derive a biblical ethical framework to approach different topics? One person is Brian Brock, who's a professor of theology at Aberdeen, and he particularly looks at disability. But he's looking at euthanasia, he's looking at reproductive technologies, he's looking at lots of different things. Brian Brock, well worth looking up. The other you'll find clips of the other person I recommend that you'll find clips of on YouTube is a guy called Dr. Callum Miller, who's a medical doctor who is very involved in the debate over euthanasia and the debates around early life technologies. I'd recommend those two people. Note down those names, have a look at those people, Brian Brock and Dr. Callum Miller. You'll find some of Callum Miller's stuff on our website as well.
So Lynn wants to ask a question, then Claire. I'm sticking with Lynn because...
I'm okay. I mean, I'm a nurse, and I've had lots of dealings with death. I don't mean I'm making people die, but I do spend time with dying people. That sounds really awful. And I've always been anti-euthanasia for many, many reasons. One, biblical, but secondly, because I don't believe, like you've said, there is a choice. I think most of the time, if we're unwell in some way or disenfranchised in any way, that our choices are removed often, usually by the people who are supposed to be looking after us. And sometimes people are very well-meaning, might even be families who love that person very much. But I don't believe anyone has the right to speak for somebody else. And I'm always really happy that God's in control of life and death. And the more I've been a nurse for 42 years, which does sound an awful long time now and make me very, very old. But the longer I've done it, and the longer I've been a Christian, the more I'm relieved that there's somebody bigger than me and bigger than some of the idiots that I work with and some of the most clever people I work with, that will always do what is the right thing. And I think we do need to support the hospice movement. We do need to invest more money in people that have disabilities or health needs or who are dying. I believe medical science is very important, and some diseases now that we live with and have fantastic lives with are because of that. But I still never believe that somebody's life is not worth living, ever. So I just thought I'd say it.
I mean, we can carry on this discussion
Sure.
afterwards, perhaps. Do you want to say something, Claire?
Last question, I think.
So, I would be kind of... Oh, I feel like I'm shouting. I felt a bit challenged when you said that the biggest fear that humans have is death. Because I'm not going to say I disagree, because you guys are the experts, but I've never been afraid of dying, ever. I've got mental health issues and all sorts of things, and I've been more afraid of living. And I think when you mentioned people just now who can be suicidal, they're not afraid of dying, they're afraid of continuing to live and live how they are living and the life that they have had. And the mental stuff that goes on in them. I think people, certainly me, I think they're much more afraid of that than actual, because the death actually seems like a peaceful end to all of that, and that's why people consider taking their own life and suicide and stuff, and they don't think logically or rationally or about God or anything in that moment. They're more afraid of what's to come than what they're actually about to do. And I suppose my question from that would be, like all the questions that have been asked today, I got this from that question about the impact. Christianity has such a universal impact on me, and I know it's the hope of the world, I know it's the hope of the future, I know it's the answer, I know that if Jesus didn't die, the rest of it is gobbledygook and pointless. So I know all of that. And so I know how it's relevant to the 21st century, but the one thing I've always struggled to do is translate that personal, if that makes sense. I don't know. I know what I'm trying to say, but it's hard to get it from here to here. So I think that's probably the question that a lot of people are asking as well, is not how is God relevant in 2024, but how is God relevant to me personally?
Can I just thank you for your honesty?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I find that on a daily basis, like I am free now. Unsilenced. Even this morning, when I woke up to come here, I found myself thinking, I of course, I was very excited to come and speak, but it's a Saturday morning, and I wanted to be at home with the family, you know. And so I found myself, I'm like, why am I getting up at this time in the morning? Why do I do this? I'm like, oh, Lord, I love you. I want to serve you. I want to serve people. I want to help equip people. And I found inside my own morning, this morning, I found selfishness. I found laziness. I found hope. I found the opportunity to serve. I found a God affirming me in my selfishness and in my laziness, who said, I can still use you even though you're a bit lazy and a bit selfish. And I find every day, if I walk in the gospel, in that being aware and awake to how I might learn things that I need to ask forgiveness for from God. That's one way that God connects my head to my heart, is showing me where I need to grow and where I need to ask for forgiveness. And the other is him speaking to my shame self and to my self-criticism and saying, I love you, you're my child, I'm for you, I see you as clean, hidden with Christ in God. And I experience moments of both conviction of sin and moments of feeling forgiven and reconciled. And those moments enjoyed over days, which turn into weeks, which turn into months, which turn into years, are for me one of the deepest and most real, ongoing walks in my faith. That's where my faith really is. And I find that as I pray in that mode of, I'm sorry, Lord, will you forgive me? I love you, I want to serve you. Will you tell me how much you love me? I find that connects my head to my heart as I try to live in and seek out moments of living in and under the gospel. That's for me. And Bible is helpful to that. Bible reading's helpful to that during the day. Bible notes and things. Friendships. Charlie and I have been friends a long time and have encouraged each other in faith for 20 years. But friendships are wonderful, but it's also that internal unlocking of my heart's door to say, I will listen to you in the quiet place, and I will receive not only what you say, but I will receive your forgiveness in the quiet place too. It's that. And then my peace comes out of that too.
I just add a couple of things, one of which is that we live in a broken world, and that means things are broken out there and they're broken in here. And some of us will know that physically, some of us that are mentally, that will know it in our lives, will know it in all different ways. And we actually need all the help we can get with those things. So if somebody breaks their leg, we absolutely should pray for them. We should also recommend they go and get an x-ray and plaster cast or whatever. And so I do think that we need to make the most of the different ways in which God has enabled human beings to help one another. And whether that's friendship, I mean, you know, I've spent a while in counseling for mental health things. It's not an unusual thing. It's a normal part of being a human being, finding things hard. And some of us will have particular difficulties at different times. And it's really important that we get that help. The other thing, though, just to come back to what Thomas said, it's really important sometimes that we don't talk about Christianity as a worldview or as a kind of downloadable set of, this is Christianity, and once you sort of step over the threshold, you're in and everything's sorted.
Relationship.
We had it come up earlier in the Felix reading. You've got the first way that the Christians are talked about, before they're even called Christians, is they're called followers of the way. And so we talk quite a lot in some of our training about spiritual formation. And that is how we are formed by the Holy Spirit as God works in us to become more like Jesus, to receive forgiveness and healing, teaching and straightening out of our minds and our hearts. And we become more and more conformed to the likeness of Christ. And we do that through relationship with God. The God who is sort of out there, up there, everywhere. The God who became one of us and knows what it is and was tempted in every way and yet was without sin. And the God who lives in our hearts, and so we don't do it alone. And so I would say, use all the things you can, but also let's walk on that way together. Let's go there. And I think that's what Tom's saying about that process that we have to go through each day, each hour sometimes of each day. And we don't, and sometimes we fall back, sometimes we slip off, but we just keep kind of going, okay, Lord, I'm pursuing you. And the great thing is he says, I'm with you to the very end of the age.